The heart monitor beeped in the darkness. My parents stood outside my ICU room close enough that I heard every word through the fog of my coma. "Let her die," my mother whispered, her voice cold as the hospital tiles. "We'll get everything." I couldn't move, couldn't scream. They were already planning to replace me at my grandfather's will reading, as if I was already gone. But they didn't know about the dog, or what he would carry into that room the moment they thought they'd won. Have you ever been erased by the ones who were supposed to love you? The stories on this channel are created solely for entertainment, educational, and storytelling purposes. While some stories are inspired by real situations submitted by viewers via email, most details have been fictionalized, combined, or altered. My name is Erin Wolfe. I'm 35 years old, a project manager at a mid-sized architecture firm in Dallas. For most of my life, I believed I came from a respectable family, the kind that sends Christmas cards and attends church on Easter. I was wrong about almost everything. To understand what happened in that hospital room, you need to understand my mother. Patricia Wolfe wasn't born cruel. She was made that way, one disappointment at a time, by a father who never learned how to love her. I remember a story she told me once, when I was maybe 10. She had won a piano competition at age 12 first place, a gold trophy she polished for weeks. She rushed home to show my grandfather. He glanced at it, nodded once, and returned to his newspaper. That was all. No hug, no "I'm proud of you," just a nod in silence. My mother spent the next 46 years trying to earn a different reaction. She never got one. Grandfather Harold was not a war man. He spoke in short sentences and measured his affection like a miser counting coins. I didn't understand why until much later, when I learned about the years he'd been absent, the years that broke something in my mother that never healed. But with me, he was different. He taught me to fish at his lake house, let me win at chess until I was old enough to beat him fairly, sat with me on his porch watching storms roll in. He once told me in a rare moment of openness, "I wasn't a good father to your mother, Erin. I've tried to be a better grandfather." I thought he was just being humble. I didn't realize he was confessing. What I also didn't realize, what took me decades to see, was what my mother witnessed every time grandfather and I were together. She watched her father finally learning to love. And he was giving all of it to me. There was another fracture in our family, one I only glimpsed as a child. My Aunt Miriam, my mother's younger sister, had been erased. No photographs, no mentions at holidays. When I asked about her once, my mother's face turned to stone. "She betrayed this family," she said. "That's what happens to people who betray us." But I found something strange once, in grandfather's desk. A birthday card addressed to Miriam, dated just 3 years earlier. If she had been cut off, why was he still writing to her? I filed that question away. I wish I had asked it sooner. 2 years before grandfather died, something happened between him and my mother. I wasn't there, but I learned about it later. He told her directly that he was leaving everything to me. Not to punish her, he said, but to protect me from her. "You destroyed your mother's final wishes," he told her. "I won't let you do the same to Erin." My mother never forgave him, and she never forgave me for being the reason. When grandfather passed, I grieved the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. 2 weeks later, a drunk driver ran a red light and put me in the ICU with a brain injury that required emergency surgery. My mother had healthcare power of attorney. I had signed it 5 years earlier, back when I still trusted her. The doctors told her I had a 70% chance of dying without the operation. She asked for time to think. That night, she sat in my hospital room with my father. She thought I was completely unconscious. She didn't know my phone was still recording. And she didn't know that behind the curtain, a nurse named Grace heard every word she said, including the 6 words that changed everything. My mother decided I was worth more dead than alive. She assumed that because I couldn't move, I couldn't hear. She assumed that because I was helpless, I was alone. She was wrong on both counts. 6 weeks later, I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was my mother's face hovering over me, and in that unguarded moment before she realized I was conscious, I caught something that told me everything I needed to know. It was a flicker of frustration, quick as a blink, before she rearranged her features into what was supposed to look like relief. She looked at me the way you look at a bill you thought had been paid. For one unguarded moment, my survival was an inconvenience. Then she smiled and said, "Oh, thank God, sweetheart. We were so worried." But I had seen the truth. And in that instant, still groggy from the coma, I made a decision that would change everything. I would play the role she expected. Confused. Weak. Memory gaps. No threat at all. My mother had underestimated me my whole life. For the first time, I would use that to my advantage. The doctors ran tests for days. I answered their questions slowly, pretending to search for words I knew perfectly well. When my parents visited, I let my eyes drift, let sentences trail off, let them believe the brain injury had taken more than it actually had. My mother patted my hand and spoke to me in that syrupy voice people use with children and the very old. She had no idea I was watching her just as carefully as she was watching me. During one of their visits, I heard my parents whispering near the door when they thought I was asleep. My father was nervous, asking about timelines and paperwork. My mother's voice was calm, controlled. She mentioned something about guardianship, about having me declared mentally incompetent. She said the family attorney Collins was handling everything. The will reading had been delayed for my health, she explained. But what she really meant was that they needed time to finish burying me legally, since they had failed to bury me literally. They were going to take away my right to inherit, my right to make my own decisions, my right to exist as anything other than a dependent under their control. I kept my breathing steady, I kept my eyes closed, and I memorized every word. One evening after my parents left, a nurse I had seen before pulled a chair close to my bed. Her name was Grace, and she had kind eyes that had seen too much. She glanced at the door, then spoke quietly. She told me she had been in the room that night, the night my mother decided to let me die. She had been checking my IV when my parents walked in, and she had stepped behind the curtain, frozen, as she listened to everything. When they left, she checked my phone and discovered it had been recording the whole time. She made a backup. She kept it safe. I asked her why she would do that for a stranger, why she would risk anything for someone she did not know. Grace was quiet for a moment, and then she told me about her own daughter. They had not spoken in 12 years. Grace had worked too much when her daughter was young, always taking extra shifts, always promising she would be there next time. Her daughter grew up angry, and Grace said she had every right to be. But somewhere in those years of silence, Grace learned something important. She learned that family is not about blood or obligation. Family is about showing up. Her daughter did not choose to show up for her, but Grace could choose to show up for others. That was why she was here, she said. Not because anyone was paying her, because she was choosing to be here. That night, lying in that hospital bed, I understood something I had never grasped before. I used to think family was something you were born into, a lottery you could not control. Grace taught me different. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when you are bleeding. The next day, a man came to visit me. He wore a chaplain's badge, but I knew immediately he was not there to pray. His name was Thomas Reed, and he was my grandfather's attorney. He sat beside my bed and explained everything in a low, careful voice. 2 years before his death, my grandfather had contacted Reed in secret. He knew Patricia would try something. He had watched her destroy her own mother's final wishes 20 years earlier, and he was determined not to let it happen again. Harold created an authentic will with Reed, leaving 85% to me, 10% to my Aunt Miriam, and 5% to a foundation for elder abuse victims. He also recorded a video explaining his decisions and documenting Patricia's history of manipulation. And here was the part that stunned me most. Harold and Miriam had never actually lost contact. For 20 years they had been communicating in secret, and Patricia never knew. Miriam had been waiting 2 decades for the chance to stand beside me. Reed had been holding everything, waiting for Patricia to make her move. My accident and Grace's phone call told him the time had come. Reed told me one more thing before he left. My grandfather had left specific instructions that if anything ever happened to me, Reed was to make sure I received Scout, grandfather's old dog. Patricia had wanted to put Scout down after Harold died. She called him old and useless. But Harold made Reed promise to protect him. A few days later, I was secretly transferred to a rehabilitation facility that Miriam had arranged. My parents did not know the exact location. They were told I needed specialized care. When Miriam brought Scout to visit me, he was grayer than I remembered, moving slower, but his tail still wagged when he saw me. I held him close and noticed something in his old collar. A tiny piece of paper, weathered but legible. It was my grandfather's handwriting. It said, "Find Thomas Reed. He has everything you need. I am sorry I could not protect you in person." Even in death, my grandfather was still trying to save me. Over the next 3 months, I recovered in secret. Grace resigned from the hospital and came to help with my care. Miriam visited often, and slowly I came to know the aunt who had been erased from my childhood. I watched my grandfather's video, and I wept at the sound of his voice, at the love and the sorrow in his words. I reviewed the authentic will. I worked with Reed to prepare for the will reading. And every time my parents came for their supervised visits, I played my part perfectly. I stumbled over words. I pretended not to remember names. I let them believe I was fading. Every day I pretended to struggle. I was actually memorizing the case we would build against them. One night, Reed presented me with a choice. He said we could leak everything to the media before the hearing. My mother's conversation, the recording, the suspicious circumstances of my accident. It would destroy Patricia publicly before she ever faced a courtroom. I thought about it. I will not pretend I did not want that revenge, swift and complete. But then I thought about what it would mean. It would drag my grandfather's name through scandal. It would turn my survival into a circus. It would make my victory about destruction rather than justice. And worst of all, it would make me exactly like her. I told Reed no. I wanted Patricia to face justice in a courtroom. I wanted the law to hold her accountable. I did not want to become the kind of person who destroys people through whispers and headlines. That was what she would do. That night, I realized that surviving my mother was only half the battle. The other half was surviving myself, the version of me that wanted to destroy her as completely as she had tried to destroy me. I had to choose who I would become when this was over, and I chose not to let her turn me into her mirror. My mother thought she was watching a broken woman slowly fade away. She had no idea she was watching a trap close around her, a trap my grandfather had spent 2 years building, and I had spent 3 months preparing to spring. The will reading was in 2 weeks. I would arrive in a wheelchair, looking exactly as helpless as she expected. She would never see me coming. The day of the will reading arrived on a grey Tuesday morning. Collins had scheduled it at his office downtown, a wood-panelled conference room designed to make wealthy families feel important while their legacies were divided up on paper. I arrived in my wheelchair, pushed by an aide Miriam had arranged. I kept my head slightly bowed, my eyes unfocused, my hands folded loosely in my lap. The picture of a woman who did not fully understand what was happening around her. My mother was already there when I arrived, dressed in tasteful black, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she had probably practiced with in front of a mirror. My father sat beside her looking nervous, his leg bouncing under the table. Collins stood at the head of the room shuffling papers, and when he saw me wheeled in, I caught him exchanging a quick glance with my mother. They thought they had won. The guardianship paperwork was still processing, not yet approved, but Collins had delayed as long as legally possible. He had to proceed with the reading, and he believed my mother's version of the will would hold. Patricia came over and knelt beside my wheelchair, taking my hand in hers. She smelled like expensive perfume and contempt. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked in that sugary voice. I blinked slowly and gave her a vague smile, the kind of smile a person gives when they do not quite understand the question. She patted my hand and returned to her seat, satisfied. Collins cleared his throat and began. He read from what he claimed was my grandfather's final will and testament, signed 6 months before his death. The document left 70% of Harold's estate to Patricia and Richard. 20% would go to various charities, which I knew was just for appearances, to make the will look less greedy. And 10% would go to me, but only under court-appointed guardianship, which meant my mother would control every penny. When Collins finished reading that last part, Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand again. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said. "We'll take care of everything for you." I kept my expression blank. I did not trust myself to speak. Collins was preparing to finalize the proceedings, asking if there were any questions, when the conference room door opened. I did not turn around, but I watched my mother's face, and what I saw there was worth every moment of the past 4 months. Her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something close to terror, all in the span of 3 seconds. Thomas Reed walked in first, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him came Aunt Miriam, the sister my mother thought she had erased from existence 20 years ago. And behind Miriam came Grace, the nurse my mother never knew existed, holding her phone like a weapon. Reed spoke calmly, but his voice carried the weight of 2 years of preparation. He introduced himself as the attorney Harold Wolfe had retained in 2022, 2 years before his death, specifically because Harold had anticipated this exact scenario. He said he had Harold's authenticated last will and testament, created when Harold was of sound mind, along with video testimony explaining his decisions. My mother's face went white. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "This is absurd," she said. "Father never contacted any other attorney. This is a forgery." She must have manipulated him when he was sick. Reed did not flinch. He did contact me, Mrs. Wolfe, and he predicted you would say exactly that. Reed opened his medical certification confirming Harold's mental competency at the time of signing. Comparative medical records showing Harold's cognitive decline during the period when he supposedly signed my mother's version. The authentic will left 85% to me, 10% to Miriam, and 5% to a foundation for victims of elder abuse. Reed read one clause aloud that made my mother sink back into her chair. It stated that if Patricia or Richard attempted to contest the will, they would be automatically disqualified from any inheritance, and Reed was authorised to release to authorities all documentation regarding Patricia's prior manipulation of my grandmother Eleanor's estate, as well as evidence of her pattern of financial exploitation. My mother had destroyed her own mother's final wishes 20 years ago. My grandfather had known. He had been waiting. Reed set up a laptop on the conference table. Mr. Wolfe also left video testimony, he said. The screen flickered to life, and there was my grandfather. He looked frail, but clear-eyed, his voice steady. He spoke directly to the camera, and even though I had watched this video before, hearing it in this room with my mother present made it feel completely different. He said he knew that if Patricia was watching this, she had done exactly what he feared she would. He said he was not angry. He was heartbroken. Then he said something I had not fully understood until that moment. He admitted that he had failed her. He did not know how to be a father when she needed one. He sent her away when she was 12 because he was too focused on saving his company to save his daughter. He came back expecting everything to be normal. It was not. And he did not know how to fix it. But then his voice hardened. He said that his failure did not excuse what she became. She destroyed her mother's final wishes. She exiled her sister for trying to stop her. And now she was trying to destroy the only person who ever loved him, without wanting anything in return. He said he was leaving his estate to me not because I earned it, but because he knew what Patricia would do with it. She would use it to hurt people, just as she had always done. And then he looked straight into the camera and said he knew about the insurance policy. He knew about the questions surrounding my accident. He had documented everything. If anything happened to me, Reed had instructions to deliver all of it to the authorities. The video ended. The room was silent. Then Grace stepped forward, holding up her phone. "There's one more thing," she said. She pressed play, and my mother's voice filled the room. The recording from my hospital room. Every word preserved. "Let her die. We'll finally get what we deserve." My father crumbled first. He turned to my mother with a look of horror and confusion. "Patricia, you told me she would recover. You said we were just protecting the family." My mother's voice came out sharp as a blade. "Shut up, Richard." Throughout all of this, I had not moved. I sat in my wheelchair with my head bowed, exactly as helpless as they expected me to be. But now, slowly, I gripped the armrests. I pushed myself up. I stood, without assistance, without trembling, strong. I looked directly at my mother for the first time in 4 months without pretending to be someone I was not. I told her I remembered everything, every word, every plan. Every night she sat in my hospital room hoping I would stop breathing. I told her I heard her choose money over her daughter's life. I heard her blame me for receiving the love she could not earn. And I told her I decided something in that hospital bed. I decided I would survive. Not to punish her, but to prove that her kind of poison does not have to be inherited. The room was silent, except for the sound of my mother's breathing, shallow and rapid, the breath of someone who had controlled every variable for decades and had just discovered she had never been in control at all. For the first time in my life, my mother looked at me and saw someone she did not recognize. Not a victim, not a burden, not the unwanted daughter who had somehow stolen her father's love. She saw someone who had survived her. And that terrified her more than prison ever would. What happened after that moment in the conference room moved faster than I expected. Collins was immediately suspended from practicing law pending investigation. My parents were detained for questioning before they even left the building. The insurance policy I had unknowingly signed triggered a fraud investigation, and the circumstances of my accident were reopened. Prosecutors started looking into the drunk driver who hit me, specifically who had paid his bail and hired his expensive lawyer. Someone with resources had helped him avoid consequences, and now investigators wanted to know who. The evidence against my mother was overwhelming. The phone recording was admissible because I had been present in the room, even if unconscious. Medical records proved my grandfather's cognitive state at both will signings, showing clearly that he was lucid when he signed the authentic will with Reed and significantly impaired when he signed my mother's version. Documentation showed the coerced signature. And there was the insurance policy, taken out on my life 8 months before the accident with my mother as the sole beneficiary. I had signed those papers without reading them carefully, trusting her when she said it was routine family financial planning. That trust had almost killed me. A few days after the will reading, Miriam sat me down and told me the full story. The story that had been hidden for 20 years. She said this was not the first time Patricia had done something like this. 20 years ago, their mother Eleanor was dying. Eleanor had always been closer to Miriam, and Patricia could not bear it. In their mother's final weeks, when she was barely conscious from pain medication, Patricia convinced her to change her will. Miriam tried to stop it. She confronted Patricia, threatened to tell Harold, threatened to get lawyers involved. Patricia responded by telling everyone that Miriam was the one trying to steal from a dying woman. She turned the whole family against her younger sister. Harold knew the truth, Miriam said, but he had no proof. He was devastated that he could not protect his wife's final wishes. A year later, he reached out to Miriam in secret. They had been in contact ever since, meeting quietly, talking on the phone when Patricia was not around. He swore he would never let Patricia do this again. That was why he protected me, Miriam explained. I was his chance to finally stop her. I was his redemption. The legal proceedings took about 2 months. My mother faced multiple charges: elder financial exploitation, a first-degree felony, forgery of a legal document, inheritance fraud exceeding $300,000. The insurance fraud investigation was ongoing and could add more charges later. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, eligible for parole after 5 years with good behaviour. My father's charges were lesser: accessory to fraud, conspiracy. His full cooperation as a witness against my mother significantly reduced his sentence. He received 3 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. Collins, the family attorney who had helped orchestrate everything, was disbarred permanently and sentenced to 3 years in prison for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The investigation into my accident remained open. Prosecutors said they lacked sufficient evidence to charge my mother with attempted murder, but she remained a person of interest. If new evidence emerged, additional charges could extend her sentence by decades. The night of my mother's sentencing, I sat alone in my apartment with Scout, sleeping at my feet. I expected to feel joy, relief, triumph. I felt nothing. Miriam called to congratulate me. "How do you feel?" she asked. "You won." I could not answer her. I had spent months dreaming of this moment. My mother in handcuffs, the judge reading the verdict, the look on her face when she realized she had lost everything. I thought that was what peace would feel like. I was wrong. Her sentence did not give me peace. It gave me space. Space to figure out what peace actually looked like when it was not defined by her punishment. I wrote in my journal that night, trying to understand why victory felt so hollow. I had won. So why did I feel like I had just finished an exam I could not remember why I had studied for? 3 weeks after the sentencing, a letter arrived from the Women's Correctional Facility. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope, and my first instinct was to burn it without opening it. But the envelope was thick, heavier than a single letter would be. I opened it and found something I did not expect. Inside, along with a short note from my mother, were yellowed papers. Old letters in my grandfather's handwriting, addressed to my little Paddy from decades ago. Against my better judgment, I read them. The first letter was dated 1980, when my mother was 12 years old. "My dearest Patty," it said, "I'm so sorry I have to go. The company needs me in New York. Aunt Helen will take good care of you and Miriam. I'll be back before you know it. I love you more than anything, Daddy." The second letter was from 1981. "I know you're angry that I missed your birthday. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Just a few more months." The third was from 1982. "I'm sorry I couldn't come for Christmas. Things here are complicated. I'm trying, Patty. I really am." After that, the letters stopped. No explanation, just silence. I did some research. My grandfather's company had nearly collapsed in 1983. He spent 5 years fighting to save it. During that time, he sent his daughters to live with relatives. My mother was 12 to 17 during those years. Miriam was 8 to 13. When Harold finally brought them home, he was a different man. Closed off, unable to reconnect. Miriam, younger and more adaptable, eventually forgave him. My mother never did. My mother's note was brief and sharp, written to wound. "You think you know who your grandfather was," she wrote. "You don't. He abandoned me when I was 12, sent me away like I was luggage. For 5 years I waited for him to come back. He never even called. Then he finally brought us home and acted like nothing had happened, like I was supposed to just forget. Like I hadn't spent my entire adolescence wondering why my father didn't want me. And then you came along. And suddenly he had all this love he'd been hiding for decades. He learned how to be a grandfather because he felt guilty about failing as a father. You weren't special, Erin. You were his redemption project. His way of pretending he hadn't destroyed me first. I hope knowing that gives you as much peace as it gave me. I sat with those letters for hours. The grandfather I had idealized, the only person I believed had truly loved me, was also the man who had broken my mother. His love for me was not pure. It was compensation, guilt, an attempt to do over what he had failed with Patricia. Was I ever really loved for who I was? Or was I just convenient? A second chance for a man who could not face his first failure? My whole life I thought I was the hero of this story, and my mother was the villain. What if we were both just casualties of a man who loved us the only way he knew how? Imperfectly, incompletely, and far too late. For weeks I could barely function. The victory felt meaningless. The inheritance felt tainted. Everything I thought I knew felt like a lie. My mother wanted to destroy me one more time, and from a prison cell she nearly succeeded. Not with violence, not with lawyers, with the truth. The truth that my grandfather was not the saint I had made him. The truth that his love for me grew from the ashes of his failure with her. I had won the legal battle, but I was about to face a much harder fight, the battle to make peace with a truth that had no winners. 4 months passed before I could face those letters again. 4 months of sleepless nights and questions with no good answers. Finally, I brought them to Miriam. I spread the yellowed papers across her kitchen table and asked the question that had been eating me alive. Was it true, what Mother said about grandfather? Miriam did not deny any of it. She told me our grandfather was not a saint. He made terrible mistakes with my mother, and with her too. He sent them away during the most formative years of their lives. Miriam was 8, Patricia was 12. She asked me if I understood what that does to a 12-year-old girl, to be sent away by the father she idolized. When he finally brought them home, he did not know how to be a father anymore. Patricia was a stranger to him, and he was a stranger to her. She spent the rest of her life trying to earn back something that had been lost forever. I asked Miriam directly. So she was right? I was just his guilt project? Miriam shook her head. His love for me was real, she said, but so was his guilt. Both things could be true. People are not simple. Our grandfather failed Patricia terribly, and he genuinely loved me. That did not make his love fake. It made it human. Then Miriam said something that changed everything. She reminded me that Patricia was wounded by Harold, but so was she. They experienced the same abandonment. Miriam chose to forgive. Patricia chose to let the wound define her entire life. The people who hurt you were hurt first, Miriam said. That is almost always true, but understanding their pain does not mean accepting their behavior. Patricia chose what to do with her wound. She chose to pass it on instead of healing it. That was her choice. Not Harold's, not Miriam's, not mine. That night, I understood something profound. Explanation is not excuse. Everyone who hurts you has a story. Understanding that story is wisdom. Using it to justify their actions is enabling. I could see my mother's wound clearly without letting it become my excuse to accept her abuse. I wrote my mother one letter. It would be my only communication with her. I told her she wanted to destroy me with those old letters, that she wanted me to doubt everything about grandfather's love, my own worth, the meaning of everything I survived. I told her it were on lie. On lie told her something she would never understand. I can hold two truths at once now. I understand that grandfather hurt her. I understand that she spent her whole life hungry for love that did not come. I understand that his affection for me must have felt like a knife every time she saw it. I understand her completely, and I do not forgive her. Understanding someone does not mean you have to let them back into your life. It means you see them clearly. I see her now. The wound and the weapon, the victim and the villain, the little girl who waited 5 years for her father, and the woman who decided to make everyone else pay for his absence. I can hold compassion for the child she was. And I can refuse to accept the adult she became. I told her this was the last time I would write. I was closing the door not because I hated her, but because keeping it open would only serve her need for attention, not my need for peace. I sent the letter. Then I blocked all future correspondence from the prison. I wrote one more letter, this one to my grandfather. He would never read it, but I needed to write it. I told him I knew who he was now, not the saint I made him into. Not the villain my mother wanted me to see, just a man. A man who did not know how to be a father, who ran away from his family when things got hard, who came back too late and could not figure out how to reconnect. I told him he failed my mother. He failed Miriam. And in some ways, he failed me too, because he let me believe he was perfect, and that made the truth hurt more than it had to. But he also loved me, really loved me. His love was not pure. It was tangled up in guilt and regret and second chances, but it was real. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free of carrying his mistakes. I took that letter to the beach where he used to take me as a child. Scout walked slowly beside me, old and grey, but still faithful. I burned the letter at sunset and let the ashes drift into the water. I established the Harold Wolf Foundation with a purpose beyond what my grandfather could have imagined. Legal protection for elderly people facing financial manipulation. Family mediation services to break cycles of generational trauma. Counselling for adults estranged from toxic family systems. Grace became the executive director. Miriam sits on the board. Grandfather could not break the cycle. He broke my mother, and she tried to break me. The foundation is my way of saying it stops here. Not revenge, not erasure, just choosing something different. 6 months later, my life found a new rhythm. Sundays are for dinner with Miriam. Not from obligation, but from choice. Once a month, I have lunch with Grace. 2 women who find family in each other. Every morning, I walk with Scout along the beach near my small house. I used to think family was something you were stuck with. Now I know better. Family is Miriam, who waited 20 years to be my aunt. Family is Grace, who chose to be a witness when she could have looked away. Blood made me a wolf. Choice made me whole. My father has sent 3 letters from his supervised release. They sit in a drawer, unopened. Maybe someday I will read them. Maybe I will find a father finally trying to explain. Or maybe I will just find more excuses. I do not need to decide today. That is what freedom feels like. Tonight I sit on my porch watching the sunset. Scout sleeps at my feet. I hold an old photograph of myself at 10 and Harold at 70, both of us laughing at something I cannot remember. I think about my mother serving year 2 of 8 in a federal facility. I think about my father checking in with his probation officer. I think about my grandfather, his ashes scattered at this same beach. None of them got it right, and neither did I. I spent months planning revenge and called it justice. I spent years believing I was the only victim in a house full of them. But I am still here, still choosing, still learning. My mother wanted me dead so she could have everything. But everything was never about money. It was about love. The love she never got, the love she could not give, the love she tried to steal because she did not know any other way. I understand her now. And I have chosen to close that door forever, not because I hate her, because staying connected to her pain was poisoning my peace. My grandfather was not a saint. He was a flawed man who learned too late how to love. But he loved me, imperfectly, incompletely, wrapped in guilt, and it was still real. I have forgiven him, not because he earned it, because I refuse to carry his failures into my future. I am not what they made me. I am not the invisible daughter. I am not the inconvenient survivor. I am Erin Wolf, and I am finally, completely free. I did not survive to get revenge. I survived to prove that cycles can be broken, that wounds do not have to be inherited, that you can be failed by everyone who was supposed to love you and still learn how to love well. That is the only victory that matters, and it was always mine. If this story touched something in you, I hope you will carry one truth with you today. The people who hurt us were often hurt first. Understanding that is wisdom. But understanding does not mean you owe them forgiveness, and it certainly does not mean you owe them access to your life. You can see someone clearly, hold compassion for their wounds, and still choose to walk away. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the stranger who shows up when everyone else looks away. Sometimes family is the aunt who waited 20 years to stand beside you. Sometimes family is the choice you make every single day to surround yourself with people who choose you back. If you are trapped in a cycle of pain that someone else started, know this: you have the power to end it. Not through revenge, not through hatred, but through the simple, Difficult decision to become something different than what was done to you. That is the only victory that truly matters. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had to choose between understanding someone and protecting yourself? I would love to hear your story.